Hypocrisy has always been very progressive, but there's so much of it flying around right now you almost feel as if you need a progressive-proof vest. It's easy to criticise at a distance, but none of the people currently protesting against Israel would behave any differently in the same circumstances, and many of them would behave a hell of a lot worse, which is why the selective outrage we've been seeing is so truly nauseating. Where were all you progressive humanitarians when Assad was butchering thousands in Syria, or Bashir in Sudan? Where were the angry mass demonstrations for those people, or for the victims of the butchery in Nigeria, or for the thousands murdered in Iraq just recently, lined up face down in ditches by the hundred and executed in cold blood? Where were you people then? A few hashtags on Twitter and then tumbleweed. But the Jews of Israel finally respond to being constantly attacked by Islamic terrorists, and the world goes insane. People fill the streets and start talking about war crimes, when we all know that Hamas commit genuine war crimes every single day, and nobody gives a damn. Progressive journalists focus exclusively on children tragically killed because Hamas are using them as human shields, blaming Israel, of course. But if these fearless truth seekers were really concerned about the children of Gaza, they would also tell us that Hamas's terror tunnels were built using child labour and that hundreds died. Progressives love to tell us that Palestine must be free when they know full well that the thugs of Hamas are not fighting for freedom, they're fighting against it. Anyone in Gaza who dares to protest against the destruction that Hamas is bringing down on their heads is executed, as more than 30 people have already been during this conflict. That's how free they are. The only part of the Middle East where anyone is free is Israel, the only civilized country in the region where Jews and Arabs are free to go about their business and to worship any way they choose. Both can and do serve in the army, in parliament, and in the Supreme Court, because Israel is a free country with equal rights for everyone. The rest of the region is dominated by Arab Muslim culture, a deeply negative, racist and misogynistic culture that's anything but free. Whatever glorious history it might once have had is long gone, and now it's nothing but a self-pitying burden on humanity and a bloody nuisance to the civilized world. Jews are a tiny percentage of the Middle Eastern population, and they have a tiny sliver of land that they would have been perfectly happy with if they hadn't been repeatedly attacked by several Arab armies at once, openly committed to genocide. And I do mean actual genocide as opposed to the fantasy genocide, like the fantasy apartheid that you progressive BDS hypocrites love to prattle about. When they were attacked, the Jews surprised the world by giving the Arabs the kicking they deserved, and a lot of Arabs found themselves displaced, but not from any land that was ever called Palestine, and the land itself belonged to no country, so it is not occupied, it is disputed. Furthermore, most of the Arabs who left the West Bank were not driven from their homes at all. They left of their own accord when they were promised by the invading Arab armies that they could return safely when all their Jewish neighbours had been killed. Well, it didn't quite work out that way, of course, and now their descendants are still living in refugee camps in Arab countries in a state of genuine enforced apartheid, where they're not allowed to integrate, to work, to receive medical treatment, because the Arabs, who could quite easily alleviate their suffering, prefer instead to exploit it as a permanent political weapon. As we've seen in Gaza with the use of human shields, they care so little about their own people that they are literally disposable. On the other hand, what we never hear about are the hundreds of thousands of Jews who were forcibly expelled from Arab countries because they were quickly assimilated by Israel, a civilized country, which is why they are not still living in refugee camps. But what about their land that was stolen? And what about their right of return? But let's say that Israel forgets all about this and forgets about the constant genocidal attacks from the past and the constant bloodthirsty Jew-hating rhetoric of the present, for the sake of peace and all, and agrees to go back to the 1967 borders, which, by the way, are now physically impossible to defend against modern weaponry. How do they prevent the Arabs from attacking them yet again? Any suggestions? Take them at their word when they say they won't. Well, that would be very progressive, suicidally so in fact, and everyone knows it. Yet it seems to me that this is precisely what so many progressive people actually want to see. They want to see the Jews of Israel agree to a position where it's impossible to defend themselves and trust the Arabs to let them live in peace. Anyone who seriously believes that that is a realistic scenario is so deluded they should be on medication. Arab Muslims have never let anyone live in peace, and they're not about to start with Jews, as they have repeatedly made clear to anyone who will listen, which doesn't appear to include anyone in the resolutely biased Western media who carefully misinform the progressive consensus to keep it ignorant and rabidly anti-Israel. Consequently, progressive opinion will never be happy until Israel surrenders and allows its people to be murdered for peace. Open the borders and give free access to terrorist fighters and suicide bombers. After all, they have human rights too. Well, somehow I don't think it's going to happen that way, but whatever does emerge from this conflict, one thing is already crystal clear: that any future humanitarian aid to Gaza will be used to rebuild the tunnels and to rearm Hamas, who will then attack Israel yet again without any regard whatsoever for the welfare of their own people. So check books out, all you progressive Western bleeding hearts, because we all know that's what you really want, because then you can go through the same self-righteous pantomime all over again and wallow once more in your criminally biased selective moralizing from a suitably safe distance.